in the COVID-19 Beer Hub. So a warm welcome to you. We'll be starting in just under 1 minute with this session, this special session together with guests that I'm going to be introducing. And our guests of honor for this session are actually the over 750 individuals who spent time during November, December 2020 in a time that was particularly challenging for immunization professionals, took the time to reflect on their practice and how they had successfully challenged vaccine hesitancy in the past in order to prepare for the challenges of COVID-19 vaccine introduction. See you in about a minute. We're getting started. We're kicking off the session a little bit late, but that's what happens when you have great back-to-back sessions. Bear with us. We'll be right with you. We're getting started to kick off this session. Just checking to see if Juliet Bedford, who will be our first presenter, is here. And yes, of course, she is right on time. Apologies for starting this session late. This almost never happens, but when it does, we move on. So thank you for joining Juliet Bedford. We also have with us John Vanderheid from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let me just find you in the room, and then we'll be getting started. Let me see. Yeah, all right. A warm welcome to both of you. We're going to be kicking off, so let me just cue up the slides. This is from what Juliet Bedford will be presenting. So as you can see here, the topic is overcoming barriers to vaccine acceptance in the community. Let me see something. All right, something has gone a little bit strange with the slides. That also happens, and I think we'll have to live with this one. Juliet, a warm welcome to you. Are you able to unmute?
I am.
Okay, wonderful. So you'll have to, I'm happy to be, to be clicking through the slides upon your command. We're going to dive right in. This is a 60-minute session. We do have a little bit of leeway to go over time. Because where we want to spend the most time is we have almost 200 people in the room. Many of you are amongst the group that developed case studies in this vaccine hesitancy exercise done by the Geneva Learning Foundation in December 2020, working closely with you. I'm going to try to see if I can show you this here. Yes, so this was the page for the original exercise, where what we wanted to do was really explore this theme and through the lens of the experience of health professionals, asking you, can you think of a time when you helped an individual or a group overcome their initial reluctance, hesitancy, or fear about vaccination? And the answer was, for 750 of you, yes, I can think of a time, and it's important, significant enough to me that I'm going to tell you about it and write a case study and help others peer review their case studies. So Juliet, let's dive right in. You'll tell us what you and your team at Anthropologica did with these case studies, what you found, and then we'll turn to John Vanderheid to respond as to why the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation got involved early last year following these the finalization of these case studies. Juliet, over to you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Raider. It's an absolute delight to be with you today. And I'm presenting this on behalf of the whole of the Anthropologica team who have been involved. So it's great to join you today. If you want to go to the first slide, please, Raider. So I don't think we probably need to go through much of the background to this. I'm sure, as Raider said, many of you are incredibly familiar with the whole of the experience around the Peer Learning Hub and the development of these case studies. But I think it's worth remembering that the case studies were actually primarily a tool to foster reflective peer learning. But because of the rich first person narratives that they presented, this is a really valuable body of evidence that captures the realities of how health professionals, of immunization staff on the ground, frontline health professionals who are out in the community, the extraordinary measures that they have to go to achieve acceptance within the communities that they work with in terms of vaccine and vaccination. So in recognition of this, Anthropologica was commissioned to undertake an analysis of the case studies themselves, focusing on the case studies, the 734 case studies that were part of the November 2020 Peer Learning Hub. And I should just say very quickly that Anthropologica, we're a research-based organization. We specialize in applied anthropology and global health. And so we do a huge amount of formative and operational research. And it's very, very rare that you get such a rich ethnographic first-person set of data as we had in these case studies. So we were super excited to be involved. So as I said, there were 734 case studies. And if you can go to the next slide, Rada, just quickly, I want to run through the methodology a little bit, just to say that we adopted a mixed methods approach. So we really wanted to focus and prioritize the qualitative analysis of the case studies, but to do that effectively, wanted to underpin that with some quantitative analysis around the demographics of the scholars, of yourselves who took part in this exercise. And we tried to blend a sort of deductive and inductive analysis approach. So there were key questions that we knew from the Geneva Learning Foundation side, from the Bill and Melinda Gates side, from sort of the global community around vaccine and vaccination and acceptance and hesitancy. There were some key questions that we wanted to look at in this piece of work. But we also realized that there was a huge amount of data there, and so wanted to look at it inductively as well, looking at emerging themes, listening to the voices that were coming out from the case studies, some of the issues that you were prioritizing that maybe hadn't even gotten up onto the radar of the key research questions. So we wanted to blend that approach to really make sure that it was really grounded in the experiences that we were looking at in the case studies. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Rada. So just in short, there were 55 countries, scholars from 55 countries within this group of 734 case studies. The scholars were from a range of different levels of the health system. You can see that written there. Just under half of the case studies were written in English. And of that half that were in English, half of those were case studies from Nigeria. Whereas the half that were in French, there was quite a high percentage of those from the Democratic Republic of Congo. But there were also some outlying cases from other regions in the world and other countries as well. In terms of the event that the narratives captured, so obviously, as part of this process, the scholars were asked to reflect on a past event. And most of those were in the relatively recent past. In fact, only a small percentage were calling on events, sometimes from actually years and years previously, up to a decade previously. But many of them were actually focusing on events in the recent past. And about half of the case studies that we looked at focused on an event during the COVID-19 pandemic. So not to do with the vaccination, because if you remember, this is November 2020. So not looking at COVID-19 vaccination, but on an event that happened within the period of the pandemic. So just something important to bear in mind for that. Great. So I think without further ado, I'll just jump in to give you some of the key highlights and key findings. If any of you have further questions on the methodology, the approaches that we took, I'm sure Rada will make the final report available to all of you, and that should be coming within the next couple of weeks. But similarly, if you have any specific questions, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. We'd be really happy to have that engagement with you. So just looking at some of the key findings then. So most of the interventions that were documented within the case studies focused on engaging parents, caregivers, and family members of children. So in these cases, it was really looking at an event that was to do with low vaccine acceptance related to routine vaccination and vaccination campaigns for children. But it was very clear from the case studies that these low levels of vaccine acceptance actually extended beyond the immediate family unit and into specific subgroups within the community at large. So many of the interventions were actually targeting groups of individuals, parts of the community, but against this backdrop of sort of broader community engagement. And there were many different subgroups that different scholars highlighted, really flagging the need for very tailored messaging for the use of different communication techniques, for more focused interventions than was used for the general population. Specifically around nomadic groups, for example, or farming communities whose limited awareness or limited access to information about vaccines was attributed to some of their hesitancy or lack of acceptance, also around inaccessible settings or mobility and transient lifestyle. But then there were other population groups like migrant communities and marginalized minorities, illegal workers, ethnic minorities, youth and adolescents groups. So the actual case studies themselves really captured a whole spectrum of the different types of subgroups and communities that the scholars were engaging with. Similarly, religion and religious groups were found to be very influential when it came to both individual and collective decision-making around vaccination. And religious groups were frequently the focus of the events or the interventions that the scholars documented in their case studies. So regardless of religious background or geographic location, it was really evident that faith leaders as well as community leaders were incredibly important in fostering vaccine acceptance amongst their communities and their congregations. And we'll return to that in a little bit. But if we just look at the barriers to vaccine uptake, these were multifaceted and they were rarely driven by one factor alone, but rather all these different factors were layered together. So we were looking at issues of fear, of mistrust, of misconception, of mis and disinformation, of rumors. All of these were intrinsically intertwined with each other. They contributed to each other, they perpetuated each other. So it was very difficult to try and isolate one particular reason that an individual or a family or community was hesitant about the vaccine. And again, that's really the richness, the breadth of these case studies, is being able to look at some of that sort of situational analysis and contextual backdrop to these events. So just to pick a couple out of those different types of barriers or challenges, conspiracy theories and disinformation related to vaccination in general were often highlighted as being a primary barrier by the scholars. And actually that was reported as sort of the dominant barrier in about 33, about a third of all case studies. The conspiracy theories themselves were often very nuanced and again, very grounded in the specific context, but there were overarching themes that we saw appear. So mainly related to the side effects of vaccination and the fear of adverse events following immunization, but also to do with more socio-political issues like government cover-ups and population control. And these issues dominated the rumors and the disinformation and were seen to spread very quickly and almost to take on a life of their own beyond focusing just on the vaccination itself. So the mistrust in vaccination wasn't, again, always to do specifically with that vaccination event, but it was often linked to long-standing mistrust in the health system more broadly, in government institutions, in public authorities. And the legacies of mistrust for marginalized communities further fueled these issues around vaccination and added layers of complexity that the scholars had to really try and tackle in a very direct and immediate way. Also, the cost of vaccines, or if vaccines were free in itself, that also created some further distrust around both the product and also the delivery of the vaccines as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So just to move to looking at the interventions themselves, the interventions that the scholars documented as part of their case studies. So it was very, very apparent that actually the scholar wasn't often were not working alone, but really were working as part of a multi-stakeholder group. So they worked obviously as immunization staff themselves. So they had the backdrop of their immunization team. They were working with other community health workers, with community traditional and religious healers, often working in a variety of different capacities as well. So in the few case studies where actually a scholar documented working alone, most of that engagement was opportunistic insofar as it was a scholar who identified an unexpected or an unplanned opportunity or chance for engaging with a hesitant person or a hesitant community. But by and large, the events that were documented in the case studies were really exciting in terms of the different stakeholders that needed to be involved to make sure that that event, that intervention was a success. And then the case studies describe different levels or different types of engagement. And we think that these could be broadly grouped into 4 key intervention types. So the first was around targeting one-to-one counselling at an individual or at a household level. So very immediate engagement on a personal level. The second was around community sensitization, so working with larger groups. The third was around formal meetings, usually directed towards key people within the community, so community leaders, religious leaders, or women's groups, for example. And then the fourth was around organized training sessions where specific subgroups were engaged. So again, some training for teachers, for example, or religious teachers and youth groups. What was clear was that not only with the scholars working with several different stakeholders within their intervention, but the intervention itself employed several different activities or different approaches, different engagement types for trying to break down the barriers to acceptance. And these activities seldom happened in isolation, but were really part of or informed by a much broader, what we've called multi-pronged strategy for increasing acceptance within a given situation. The tone and the delivery of the intervention was absolutely critical to its success. And so not only were we looking at multi-partner engagement, different activities feeding into an event, but also the tone and the delivery of that engagement being really critical. And we see that in documented in many other types of health interventions around community engagement and risk communication as well. But it was something that came out incredibly clearly from the scholars' case studies. And also the importance of using local languages. This sounds something that is very obvious, I think, to us here today, but it's not always something that is fully appreciated at the global level in terms of it being transferred over into guidance, into approaches, into how you do this level of engagement. So being able to work with local actors, being able to work in the most local languages and the language that the community or the individual themselves were most comfortable in, rather than it being the language of the area or the language of the government. So being able to sort of move between those different language bases was very important. And for me, I think one of the most exciting pieces about these case studies was just the high level of personal involvement that was captured in the narratives. So a huge number of the scholars related having to use themselves as the point of reference. So they did demonstrations, they told stories of their own families. Several actually documented showing videos of their own children being vaccinated as a proof of evidence, to really try and encourage trust within those communities and to advocate for child vaccination. And so being able to see the first person narratives of those very personal issues is a really powerful part of this data set. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So just a couple of points here, which again, might seem quite obvious to those of you who work within the immunization space. But again, you know, with the weight of evidence coming from these case studies, we just really wanted to flag up. I think the most important of this for me is around the critical area that we have to meet people where they are and tailor activities to suit the needs of the population. And that was so clearly articulated within the case studies. Also, the longevity of engagement. So rather than looking at this as a one-off point of engagement, actually looking at engagement before, during, and after vaccine campaigns, looking at sort of this 360 approach. What is it that communities are really wanting to prioritize? What are their needs? What are their challenges? And how do we appreciate that ongoing piece that influences vaccine acceptance or vaccine hesitancy? Many of the scholars, just about 30% of cases, actually documented the need to improve the communication strategies themselves. And this included, as I said, listening to people's fears, listening to the source of hesitancy, and really trying to improve the interpersonal skills of the local staff. And in fact, interpersonal communication was really highlighted as a critical tool for positive engagement. And again, reflecting on their own experience, it was notable that many scholars felt that actually having had some training in interpersonal communication had enabled them to be able to take a softer and more sensitive approach, to develop improved listening skills, to show greater degrees of empathy. And that was really beneficial to those individuals in terms of improving their relationships with the communities that they served. So in thinking about future work and recommendations, several colleagues or several scholars really suggested that collaboration had to extend beyond working with religious leaders and community leaders, but should try to have a much more comprehensive engagement with the community, but also with healthcare professionals, with academics, with global agencies and other organizations who support immunization. So very much looking at these sort of different levels of engagement and how they interface with each other to make sure that we're all moving in the same positive direction and trying to accelerate some of the change around driving vaccine acceptance. And it was suggested that that kind of ongoing collaboration can save time, it can save resources, and it can really add more positive and reliable voices to the public conversation on vaccine acceptance. So finally, just in conclusion, and I totally appreciate that this is a whistle-stop tour through a very large piece of work. So I would really encourage you to take the time to have a look at the full report and the executive summary when it's available. But if we can just go to the next slide on the conclusions, fantastic. So just a point to make in terms of generalization. So we have made some broad generalizations. We were able to infer some broad generalizations. But I think what's very clear is that, you know, the barriers to vaccine hesitancy can't be overcome in a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's something that was so clear in these case studies. The contextual factors, the social behavioral dynamics, these are not always considered, but they're what were at the forefront of the case studies that we were working on. And as I say, vaccines aren't delivered in a vacuum. The immunization staff are working against a backdrop of a huge history of experience, both for themselves, but also the communities that they work for. And that's both positive and negative experiences that have gone before, not only of vaccination or the health system, but against this broader sort of contextual background of the social, political environment, the economics, issues around livelihood, prioritization of vaccination, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very complex sort of area, but taking that and looking at the voices that came through these narratives so clearly, I think one piece of this analysis, which we really want to try and emphasize, is to highlight the urgency of which we think the voices of immunization staff, and again, fantastic that many of you are able to join us today, but your voices need to be heard and heard at a global level. And we need to be able to, as I said, work together and have some positive momentum so that actually what happens at a global level, what happens at a local level is much more closely brought together. And if we can do that, then hopefully we will be doing you a good service and taking on the lessons and reflecting on how much incredible work goes on at a community level on an hour by hour, day by day basis. And hopefully together we'll be able to move the needle, excuse the pun, a little bit on where we are in terms of vaccine acceptance and vaccine hesitancy today. Thank you. Rada, back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Juliet. Bedford from Anthropologica, the research team that did the qualitative research over many months, taking the case studies that you produced and turning and analyzing, trying to figure out what you are telling us collectively, what you are telling us individually. Again, the question asked for those who are not just discovering this work is in November, December, it was too early. We did not know what the vaccines were going to look like for COVID-19 vaccine, but it was obvious that hesitancy would be a challenge. So we asked you, can you think of a time when you did it? You helped people move from hesitancy, fear, misconceptions, misinformation to acceptance. And 734, I forget the exact number each time, but many of you came together, collaborated intensively over this course, the course of just 4 weeks, and produced and peer-reviewed these case studies that have now been analyzed thanks to Juliet and her team. Now with us is John Vanderheid from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The BMGF, the Gates Foundation, decided to fund this work, and I'd like to turn to John to explain what he does at the Gates Foundation and why he became interested in the work of many of the people in the room developing these case studies of vaccine hesitancy. John Vanderheid, a warm welcome to you. Do introduce yourself and tell us what did you find interesting about this work, and what are your initial thoughts, given that Juliet has just presented some of the initial findings.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rada. So I'm John Vanderheid. I am an associate program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, focusing on insights. And the purpose of my team specifically is to think about how we better translate important information, data, stories, narratives, to policymakers so they're able to act on that information and set up the best supports possible for the programs that we're trying to have be successful. And the reason I got super excited about this is one of the best ways, narratives like this, first person stories like this, your actual words, is one of the best ways for me to have access to the actual experts on addressing vaccine hesitancy. And those experts are you. Those experts are the people who are on the ground doing the actual work and are embedded in the communities doing the real struggle and the real work. And we, in the international community, places like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation often have a barrier and a difficulty in hearing the stories well. And so this is one of the opportunities to be able to engage with and hear stories from the people who have the best information possible about what is successful and what their struggles are. And my initial reaction to the summary of those stories that Juliet was able to provide is that there's some pieces in there that are really telling about the ways that we have to move forward around supporting vaccination staff in addressing vaccine hesitancy, in getting the trainings and the background information and the skill sets that they need to do that in the work in the community, because you are embedded in the places where you do the structure. So, and we are really entering the time when this conversation is going to be the most critical. As Ryan has been saying, the data was collected before the COVID vaccine was available, but now that it is, we are seeing the critical importance that vaccination staff, UPI staff play in not only the physical supply side aspects of delivering that vaccine, but the community engagement, the community support, and the overall social aspects of the process. And so just really re-embedding vaccination as a social aspect as opposed to just a supply or a medical one. But that's really all I had. I think the work that Juliet presented really stands for itself in its value and its really actionable insights, but also the way in which it highlights the voice of many of the EPI staff on this call.
Thank you so much, John Vanderheid from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I've already put into the chat, and many of the scholars who are the authors of the case studies know that these are the questions we're interested in. But of course, we want your feedback and what you think of this research as well. Before we get to that, I also want to announce that we'll be asking Marta Ngoe, so the Cameroon team leader of the Scholar Alumni for the Anglophones, who together with the rest of the Cameroon team led a remarkable national survey of the attitudes and behaviors of health professionals in Cameroon about COVID-19 vaccines. So we'll be asking her for a quick oral summary of that research, which has been presented and shared within the scholar community. Now, what the other thing we want to do, and before we open up the floor to hear what you've done, how you've been since you developed this case study, did this work, your participation in this make any difference, is just to share a little bit about the Geneva Learning Foundation's perspective. And just to explain to Juliet, I did not have time to put it on a separate slide, so this is not the Anthrologica corporate view. This is TGLF's view. So really this belief that what we learned, and this perspective is really growing from what we learned from listening to you throughout the vaccine hesitancy exercise that we ran in November and December. First of all, obviously a complex problem. And what's equally obvious is that therefore blanket recommendations, prescriptive guidelines that tell you what you as a health professional need to do are unlikely to solve or be helpful in addressing the problem. That significance of local solutions and really figuring out new ways to listen to you, new ways to support you, new ways to measure, document, and learn with you, I think is going to be key to making, if we want to make progress in this area. And that's certainly what we tried to do in November and December 2020. You're going to tell us what that has changed. And then Juliet's team did a remarkable analysis, looking across all the case studies. And there's a few things I want to pull out. One is that general mistrust is like a quarter of the case studies that you produced. So we can't generalize and say that this is 25% of hesitancy, but it's 25% of the case studies that you produced. And so you have things such as, why does the government give vaccines free every time and not food, not bed nets, and not medicine? And then really looking at those legacies and mistrust and thinking about how you actually successfully were able to challenge that, because that case study in Liberia has a happy ending, has the case study author reporting that the person who said this, they were able to counter and respond and engage and achieve vaccine acceptance. Lack of information, one thing that surprised me is only 8% of the case studies. And you can see, for example, in some cases, these two mothers from Côte d'Ivoire, perhaps the case study author is in the room, unaware that hospitals would provide free care in the case of an adverse event, and therefore fearing vaccines, not the vaccines themselves, but the financial outlay, the cost of doing that follow-up care. Another fascinating sort of summary conclusion from the work done by Juliet Bedford and her team is really narrowing down to sort of 4 targeted intervention approaches, 4 things that consistently seem to produce the positive result. That was the focus of all of the case studies. And then 2 key determinants, let me get myself out of the way, and Juliet mentioned this, the tone and delivery, the empathy with which you engage with parents, with individuals, whoever they are in the community, whatever their place in society, and that personalizing it, and in a way, this cannot be prescribed or mandated. So this person who says, I use the pictures of my children, no government can tell you to do that, really, or should, probably. But in this case, when the immunization professionals decides to do this because they want to, that's the kind of creativity and problem solving that we're hoping can be supported. And when we say that one of the points made in the report is that some of these behaviors that where health professionals kind of make it up as they go along may stem because there is not necessarily national support and clear guidance. So people do whatever they can. And the question I'd like to ask, this is outside the scope of our mission and mandate as the Geneva Learning Foundation on education, is really, is that necessarily a bad thing? Is there can we learn by instead creating more space for you as health professionals to use your creativity, use your intelligence, use this relationship that you have with the communities that you serve, and put that in the service of communicating better, engaging better. So these are just a few thoughts. I want to end with this case study excerpt before we open up the discussion. A week before the campaign, this family lost a 6-year-old girl to malaria. Hope the case study author is in the room again. We see you as the guests of honor today. This work is coming from you. It is your experience that we are trying to make sense of and share with the global immunization community. I took the opportunity to visit this family that I knew all too well. As the communications officer, I had to convince the father to sign up for the vaccination. I prepared an envelope with a note of condolence for the consolation of grief. The father, he always chased away vaccine providers, but the grief practices remained and gave me the opportunity to meet him and discuss the benefits of vaccination. When we got there, I first introduced myself with these words: "We came to console you. We learned with regret about your daughter's death. That's why we bring you this little envelope." That personal touch in this case study made the difference and led to vaccine acceptance. So it is not a recipe for how you achieve acceptance, but there are definitely lessons to be learned from reading, taking the time to understand, and listening to you, which is why it's time to turn to you with these 3 questions. And again, we're going to ask you for volunteers. I suggest we start with Marta and Goe, not for these questions, but to tell you how she and other scholars in Cameroon developed and ran their own survey to better understand the attitudes and behaviors of health workers. Marta, I hope the connection will be with you today. I'm asking you to unmute. Yes, wonderful to have you. Cameroon scholar, team leader for the Anglophones. Marta, welcome.
Thank you, Reda. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to present our findings on the study, a survey we conducted in Cameroon as a scholar team on the attitude and the knowledge of healthcare workers with the COVID-19 vaccination in Cameroon. So principally, our objective was to understand their knowledge and perception. And secondly, we also wanted to have their engagement in promoting vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination in Cameroon. And it's interesting to know that the COVID-19 vaccination in Cameroon, when it came in April, health workers were prioritized as frontline health workers with over 4 million. But up to the time we closed the survey, that is, the survey was launched, it was an online survey from August to October 2021. We had just close to 52,000 health workers who have been vaccinated. That is have their full dose of the vaccine. So not up to 100, where we are looking at millions of frontline health workers to be vaccinated. So it was interesting for the scholar COVID-19 team from Cameroon to put up this survey. And our principal findings, we found out that those who took this, our respondents, 81% had taken the vaccine, were fully vaccinated, and about 18% were still to be vaccinated to make that decision to have the vaccine. So our focus was on that 18%. So trying to understand why they were still not comfortable in taking the vaccine, we had about 7 reasons for that were summarized as: they were afraid of the unknown, and some said it was not yet time for them to take the vaccine, they are still observing. Some others say they don't have time to go to the vaccination site for the vaccine. Some others say it's a scam by the government. Others said it was a way of the whites to reduce the black population. Some are still doubting on the efficacy of the vaccine, and some due to religious beliefs. Some say it's a mark of Antichrist. And we also went further to be able to understand where they have such information, where they usually, both those who have been vaccinated and those who have not been vaccinated, where they usually have their information, if they'll be able to promote a COVID-19 vaccination with the kind of information they have. Some say they don't have adequate information, and others, they say they have adequate information. And so really wanted to know where the information is coming from. The majority of them, the information was coming from social media. And once you say social media did some good and bad work, for those who were vaccinated, about 41% had their information from social media, and the rest unvaccinated had it from there. We also have TV stations, both national and international, and also radio stations. And word of mouth carry the majority of the source of information, that is from relatives and so on. And we went further to want to know the kind of information that they usually have from this especially social media, and or if they have had rumor and where they had rumor and the kind of messages they had from this rumor. And we realized that majority of the rumor they had was from social media platform, and the kind of messages that resonated were, you will die after 2 years when you get vaccinated. Vaccines were, these COVID-19 vaccines were meant to kill blacks, and it's also meant to propagate the disease, so it does not have anything to stop the disease, and it's a pharmaceutical business. And finally, that the COVID-19 vaccine is a nanochip. And with that, in conclusion, we came to realize that the reason for the non-acceptance of the COVID-19 vaccine among health workers include a lack of real-time information on COVID-19 vaccine, because this time we are not just dealing with immunization staff, but health workers as a whole. And secondly, we realize that there is lack of this involvement by the healthcare workers themselves, because first of all, they are not so confident about the vaccine, and therefore they don't even want to encourage the others in the community to take the vaccine. And they came up with some suggestions, which include sensitization should be reinforced. There should be target communication for health workers, which will include vaccine efficacy, the Area 5 related to COVID-19, and how it can be managed in terms of the government taking charge of those who really develop severe adverse events following immunization, the benefits and the risks of the vaccine. They also came up with suggestions such as health of institution, that health institutions should be a better example to, first of all, go ahead to take the vaccine in front of other personnel. And these different platforms that have been identified as the sources of their information should be furnished with the real information concerning the COVID-19 vaccine. And also there should be that kind of focus group discussion. There should be engagement of focus group discussion. And I wish to say that the national EPI, since we are working with the national EPI, they have already taken the part of the focus group discussion, which was conducted 2 months ago. So that was the findings, and for the survey that we did, it was a national survey in Cameroon by the COVID-19 Pay Health team.
Thank you very much indeed, Martha Ngoe, team leader of the scholars from Cameroon. Martha, I have a follow-up question for you. I know you participated. Of course, you were a leader in the COVID-19 Peer Hub last year. Did this work on the case studies? Was that in any way related to what you then did with this survey of health professionals? Did this contribute in any way? Do you attribute anything specific to this case study exercise that led you to then do this national survey of attitudes and behaviors of health professionals? Oh, Martha is muted. Let's see if we can unmute. I'm asking you to unmute, Martha, just to get the answer to that question. And then we shared the 3 questions. Yes, Martha, would you say there's anything that this case study exercise had anything to do with and your interest in this issue of COVID-19 vaccination amongst health professionals?
Yeah, during the COVID-19 Pay Health, with the ideas we had in the ideas engine and all those other stuff, we realized that communication is an integral part of vaccine rollout. And especially if we have to really succeed, realize that health workers are also part of a community, and therefore these health workers have the duty to own that activity. So there should be that engagement from the point of health workers. So we saw all that during the COVID-19 Pay Health exercise.
Wonderful, thank you. And just I'm showing the program on screen because, of course, the time is very short. We're actually going to hear very few of you today before this session comes to a close. You can see that right now. We are in this plenary 2, and that right afterwards, the questions. Some of you addressed in your case studies, the question of vaccination amongst health professionals is the subject of networking session 3. So right after we finish here, we may go a bit over time. Please raise your hand if you'd like to speak and share again in response to 3 questions that I'm posting in the in the chat. So not necessarily your general opinion about vaccine hesitancy, but really those three specific questions. And then we'll go into the networking session where you just click on the networking icon. Some people are networking right now. And this time we've shared with you a discussion guide, some ideas, suggested questions that you can discuss when you meet a peer in a one-to-one meeting. We realize there's some sensitive issues involved. So really, whatever you feel comfortable with, you make your own choices, your own decisions with respect to what you're willing to discuss with your peers. But it seemed important enough, and of course is a major significant issue for public health. Now, back to the questions. I've just pasted them again in the chat. I'm going to go to Mohammed Imran Qureshi. Imran, a warm welcome to you. You, of course, are a long-time scholar. You started in 2016. I'd like to hear now what you gained from the case study. What did you learn from this exercise? And if Imran does not respond right away, then we'll go to, I know there's so many others of you in the room. Let's go to Nicholas. Let me see, Nicholas Bleedy. Nicholas, we'd love to hear from you as well. And again, this is normal. We know connectivity is a struggle for everyone. So maybe Bernadette, Felix, Regis. Let me see. All right, let's see if Lydia. All right, we've got one person who's okay. Bernadette, we'd love to hear from you. Please introduce yourself. Tell us, what your case study was about, and then you can see the three. You should be able to see the three questions on your screen.
Hi, good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, thank you so very much. Bernadette Felix Regis. I'm very happy to be part of this conference here this morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a public health nursing supervisor and also the deputy immunization manager in St. Lucia. My work with vaccine hesitancy. Yes, I did make a presentation during that time, and it was more or less centered around the HPV vaccine. And we normally have the introduction of the vaccine during the grade 6 school vaccination. And there was some form of hesitancy on the part of the principal of that school. So here I found myself having to visit the school, and I must say the visit was a very successful event. And as health workers, sometimes we have to take a little step back and make ourselves present at some of those institutions. Let them see the faces behind the work, behind what we do. And I think as a result of that, I spent more time, listening rather than talking and hearing the views of the principal. And I think that in itself caused a change or shift in him accepting the team coming to the school in order to vaccinate. So sometimes, like I said, we have to actually spend more time listening rather than talking. And the involvement also is also critical in the delivery of the service that we provide. So having them involved, having them being part of what we plan to execute, having them to buy in what we do, can also have them to agree and to accept the work that we do. So all in all, at the end, it was a very successful event, and thankfully we were able to execute our duties. So thank you very much. That was my contribution.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. Felix Regis from St. Lucia. I believe you were the only participant from St. Lucia. We are launching the next full learning cycle on the 28th of February. Can I ask you, on the basis of your experience in the Peer Hub, will you be joining? And this time, can we count on the participation of your colleagues from St. Lucia? And of course, you're very diligently muted right away.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I have extended the invitation to most of my colleagues, I have encouraged them to participate, and I have been trying to convince them on the need to do so. It's very educational, very informative, and very engaging, and you get to learn a lot. So I have extended the invitation to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thank you very much indeed. All right, I believe I'm going to turn to Charlotte. Charlotte is back from the IA 2030 session. I hope that went very, very well. I know we have Imran. I know he was trying to unmute before and I had to log back in. Imran, are you there? And then we'll go to Simon Ajay from Ghana, if time allows. And we may be going a bit overtime given that we started overtime. Charlotte, is that all right with you? And how are you doing?
Yes, that's okay with me, and I'm doing fine, and it's so great to be back in the Zoom studio.
All right, wonderful. So Mohammed Imran Qureshi, I already introduced you. Can you tell us what was your specific case study about in November, December 2020? And what did you learn from this second exercise in the Peer Hub in 2020? It was a year ago. It's actually the 1 year anniversary. You and every other person who authored a case study is our guest of honor today. For that reason, we want you to share your experience and understand what's happened since then. You see 3 questions up on the screen. You know how this works. Imran, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Reda. First of all, let me appreciate Connect 4. It's just bringing world scholars together for immunization and agenda. Secondly, I want to appreciate the great presentation given by Martha. So congratulations for those reasons. Quickly coming across 2 questions and sharing a bit of my experience. Pakistan is also a big country, and the reasons the vaccine has already been rolled out. First, once people were accepting vaccines, there were certain reasons behind that. Like the vaccine quantity was less initially, as there was a lot of competition and COVAX was not providing too much vaccine in the beginning. And secondly, the fear was too much because of the high number of mortality. And the third reason is basically the education, orientation, and the importance of the vaccines. So all those factors combined together, and that's why the acceptance at the beginning of the vaccine rollout was higher. But on the other side, once the vaccine quantity is improving and you are getting much more vaccine doses for vaccine rollout on a larger scale, and then you have already vaccinated a good chunk of your population, the life has already returning to the normal. And the mortality, thanks God, is returning back to normal situation, and a very few mortality rate right now. Positivity is less than 1%. And now the community portion of mainly uneducated people and the people who have certain other reservations for vaccines, and they have their other priorities. That's why the overall vaccine hesitancy is increasing in the community. And I must share that Pakistan is the country who conducted the largest ever global mass vaccination campaign for MR. And now they have rolled out the RED
Imran,
campaign.
Yeah, thank you for
COVID vaccination.
Thank you for sharing the big picture.
That still there is last point, Rida.
Yep.
Still there is a need to think around on the vaccine hesitancy, and let's have a cumulative approach globally to address the serious issue of vaccine hesitancy with regards to the COVID vaccine rollout. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Imran. Let's now go to Simon Ajay from Ghana. Simon, the floor. Whoops! I've just accidentally muted you again. I'm asking you to unmute again. The floor is yours. Please do introduce yourself and then remind us what your case study was about. But really, what we're interested in is what's happened since then. And did this exercise in the COVID-19 Peer Hub actually make any difference for you? Did it help you in any way that you can think of? The floor is yours.
Hello, Reda. Hello, everyone. I'm Simon Ajay from Ghana. In respect to the exercises, I think it gave me a proper perspective in how to deal with the vaccine hesitancy. Actually, I worked on my case study was a family that the husband was refusing for the child to take MR2 because one of his children had BCG lymphedema. So the father of the child was trying not to understand. So from the case study, we tried to do a one-on-one discussion. And I think what is more critical is about trying to listen. And I think from my experience, what I've learned is to listen to be able to know the reasons behind hesitancy that the family may have. And in this case was fear. Others too may be because of misconceptions and rumors. We need to listen very carefully to be able to know what the hesitancy, and we've been able to give answers to most of the questions that the people are having. And I think building trust is also something that I've learned, and being honest and really critically mention most of the side effects that people may have regarding to vaccines. Because if we are not honest, we are not being able to give the right information. People may not be able to do that. And I think the question that has to do with linking that one with the COVID-19, I think from my experience of that, I've become I work as a EPI focal person. So with that exercises, I have in-depth knowledge to be able to educate and be able to be as an influencer to my other colleagues. And I happen to have a presentation where we discussed on how to address vaccine hesitancy. And I think in moving forward, the focus has to be with effective linking with the community, being able to listen, being able to learn, and being able to give proper information, being able to, because we are the holders of the information, we'll be able to give critical information, accurate and timely information, so that people will be able to really understand what we are dealing with. And we've been able to share. I think Geneva Learning Foundation has given us enough tools. And once we have these tools, we need to be able to share with our other colleagues, and also being able to give accurate and correct information to the community as and when we need. We are still battling with the COVID, but we've been as influencers, and we've been able to have the in-depth knowledge. We need to be able to continue to listen. Like I said, we need to learn, and we need to share our experiences so that to be able to collectively improve our immunization coverage and the ongoing COVID-19 vaccination as well. Over, Rita.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I've asked, I see AK Hudu, who has raised his hand, so we're going to come to you. I want to go back to Juliet Bedford and John Vanderheid, who may have to leave. We're going to extend the session after this at the top of the hour. So right now, the networking session focused on COVID-19 vaccination of health professionals is starting. But so there's so many of you here, and it's the 1-year anniversary of when we finished these case studies, then I'd like to I'd like to extend the session. But before we do, as John and Juliet may have to leave, going to turn first to Juliet and to John. What are your thoughts as you listen to these sort of follow-up stories, if you will? I know, Juliet, you've deeply engaged with the work. John, you found it sufficiently interesting to support the this comprehensive research. What for you would be the next steps to to bring the attention of the global community to this work and to this amazing amount of experience that came together through the Peer Hub to help unravel what actually works when it comes to challenging vaccine hesitancy? Let's start with John and then Juliet. Oh, I think I just muted you again, John. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks again, Rana, for the amazing opportunity to be able to hear follow-on reactions to these case studies and to hear the summary that Juliet prepared. It's been super informative, super enlightening, and super energizing on my end to hear the amazing experiences and also the amazing passion that the many case study authors and participants bringing to their work every day. And so I think those are the messages that I'm bringing back to my colleagues and bringing back to many of the international community members who sit removed from the immediate work, but also I'm super excited to hear about the ways in which this sensitization and the work can go forward, similar to what was happening in Cameroon. That was a very impressive story. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much indeed, John Vanderheid from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, Juliet Bedford unfortunately had to drop off this call, so we won't get her parting comments. I want to go back, let's see, to A.K. Hudu, who asked for the floor. So please, A.K. Hudu, you work on communication for development at UNICEF. Remind me if you, what your case study was focused on, and then you have the 3 questions before you. Please go ahead and unmute. I'm going to try not to accidentally mute you. Go ahead, please. Otherwise, if there are no further hands raised, we're going to go. Yes, please go ahead. And do introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do. Yes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is A.K. Hudu. I'm a consultant, C4D consultant. Before I was an emergency response team member in Abuja, but now I'm a C4D consultant in Lagos. First of all, I want to thank you for all the certificates gotten from the Geneva Learning Foundation. Thank you so much. So as quick as possible, let me start with the vaccine hesitancy, which I resolved a solution or a problem in Makoko, Lagos, where a team went to a school, a very big school, during the outbreak, MOPV. So the principal said he didn't want them to give the vaccine to the students, that is to the people, that's the children. The reason is that because they came to vaccinate before, it's not quite long, and he learned they have already eradicated polio. Why are they coming back? So it happened I was at that particular LG, at that particular ward, so my attention was drawn. I went to the school with some of the LGA team members, that was the health educator and the LIO. So we were able to sit with the principal. I dialogue with him. I explained the reason why the vaccination is still going on. This is an outbreak, and when there's an outbreak, definitely we need to come out for another vaccination. And this is MOPV vaccine. And if he's not aware, even though Nigeria has eradicated polio, world polio, but so far as the outbreak is now there in Lagos, we need to still revaccinate. He should be aware that if we vaccinate some children and leave some, and any of them happens to get the polio virus, one child will be able to affect over 200 children. And also explain to him, quite apart from eradicating polio virus, well, there are other international borders opening, and some countries are still battling with the wild polio virus. So we still need to keep on vaccinating till some extent. So by the time I explained a lot of things to the principal, and he's able to be convinced, he gave us all the children, over 200 children, we were able to vaccinate them. And he also told us he's going to help us to other schools, to other colleagues. He will be able to explain better as I explained to him. And that was a very good one. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much indeed. All right, I see Tijani Babagana who is asking for the floor, so let's go. And John Vanderheid, thank you for staying overtime. We started a little bit late, but this is a unique occasion. It's really the 1-year anniversary for the production of these vaccine hesitancy case studies. Tijani, the floor is yours. We'd love to hear from you. Summarize for us very quickly what your case study was about, and then what you've learned since. Has this exercise...
My name is
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Tijani.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Hello, Dr. Rida. Okay, my name is Babagana Tijani from the Yobe State. I'm the LGA Health Promotion Officer. My experience is I have the LGA, we have the crisis for the Fulani and the other community. We have to a lot of the reason that they refuse to receive their polio vaccination. I tried to extend their one ward team completely to another ward. We resolve their non-compliance because of their crisis between town and the village. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Tijani. And so, did you participate in the exercise in November, December 2020?
Yeah.
All right. And so, how has
Yes,
this?
yes.
Yeah. Would you say that this exercise has helped you in any way with the challenges you're facing now, in particular with COVID-19 vaccine introduction and vaccine hesitancy there?
I face I face a lot of challenges because there are some people that are hesitating the COVID-19 vaccination. You know, their perception of their vaccine. That is why we face a lot of the problem in our community.
All right, thank you, Tijani. All right, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Didoma Dohera Ruben. Please, I've asked you to unmute. Didoma Dohera Ruben, and recall for us what was the situation that you described in your case study, and then really what we want to understand is it's been a year. Did that exercise in the COVID-19 Peer Hub helped you in any significant way, especially with respect to COVID-19 vaccine introduction? But first, do tell us who you are and what you do.
Hello, Ruben Doma Dohira is my name, from Ghana. My experience has to do with one of the secondary schools we've been to give them a COVID-19 vaccination. A population of about 300 students. So during our introduction to them that we have come to give them vaccination, we met the school authorities, they've agreed, and then scheduled a day for us to come. So we came. We got there on that day to, meet the students and vaccinate them. The head teacher made mention that they want us to speak with the students first, which they gathered all of them and then we spoke to them. But I could realize that some of the students said that they want to see evidence-based that we, the health workers, have taken the vaccine ourselves.
Right.
So fortunately, the time he had to, my colleague video me, I had him to, they videoed me, I have the pictures and the video in my phone. So when we go to the school and such issue arise, I could see that all the students were just making a, yes, we want to see the evidence. Where is the evidence that you, the health workers, have taken it? So I took my phone and then played the video for all of them to see, where I said how the health worker took the vaccine and then vaccinated me. So when they saw that we, the health workers ourselves, have taken the vaccination, there is nothing for them to complain again. So the head teacher asked them, so are you now convinced? All of them were smiling. And then they took their seat and we vaccinated them. So to me, I and we have pictures or videos and our COVID vaccination card available with us. Wherever we go to embark on health education or to carry out a vaccination exercise, the people, will receive us well. And more to the point, when we engage engagement of community leaders, if you want to carry out a vaccination, COVID vaccination in the community, you can't do away with the community leaders. When we engage the stakeholders very well, we will surely get a good coverage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. All right, I don't see any other raised hands, Charlotte. Do you know, is there anyone that you're chatting with who wishes to speak before we close this session? Of course, this marks actually the 1 year anniversary of the second exercise in the COVID-19 Peer Hub, which was originally we had planned to do only a single exercise. We did the second one in response to what you kept telling us, which is that what you saw happening with vaccine hesitancy was scaring some of you, was challenging for all of you. Charlotte, what do we have? All right. Let's go to Mukhtar Dan Malam. Mukhtar, and then we'll go to Nasiru. Mukhtar, please go ahead, unmute yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do before we close this session. For those of you who plan to go networking, it's an important, very much a related issue on health professional COVID-19 vaccination. That's the topic for the networking. So do go if you have to. We're way over time, but we appreciate and really want to honor the commitment that led you to come back 1 year later to share with us. Mukhtar, please do introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do, and then tell us, summarize briefly your case study and tell us what's happened since then.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm a resident doctor in community medicine at Ahmadu Bello University Hospital, Zaria, Nigeria. I actually, I'm not presenting my case, but I want to comment on the last speaker's case. Is it okay?
Yes, please be concise, but yes, a follow-up comment is welcome.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, yes. Just in the issue, the children sought for evidence that he was vaccinated. It actually happened to me, and I now become the victim, so to say. The public that were now motivated me to go and get my vaccine, because at the beginning it's the COVID vaccine rollout. The healthcare workers were prioritized, but I know I was not hesitant. I know I would take it, but then I wanted to see. Okay, let me see my colleagues. What happened to them? Those things, the health police model. It's not that serious in our area, so let me just wait and see. Then people were calling me that trust me that, okay, what of this vaccine? Somebody was there in front of the vaccinated, but he wants my confirmation that actually he should go ahead to do it. It's safe and others. I told him it's safe. I told him all the signs, but then he asked, have you been vaccinated? It became difficult to explain to him that I would do it, but why is it up to now I didn't do it? That is when I realized that I had to quickly check that, because subsequently, in fact, that single card that I use, the taking the vaccine, convinced a lot of people to do it, even my family, to go and take the vaccine. So it's important, the role modeling from the health workers. It changed a lot in my case. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much for this testimonial, because it fits very well with the third and final networking session. Just to update you, for those of you, there's still 187 people in the room. So there are two things left today. One is the networking session on health professional COVID-19 vaccination. As you can see here, that is up of the next hour. So until 6 p.m. Geneva. Of course, the time is going to be different for you. And then at 6 p.m. Geneva, so at the top of the hour, we'll come back to the plenary, and this time we'll be holding the commencement ceremony for the first Immunization Agenda 2030 Impact Accelerator. So 755 alumni of the Geneva Learning Foundation's immunization program joined this Impact Accelerator. If you don't know what the accelerator is about, join the session to find out, to get the story. And we have our commencement speaker will be Dr. Folake Olayinka. She's the chair of the IA 2030 Working Group for universal health coverage and primary health care. And then, of course, we will be awarding certificates to those of you who met all of these certification requirements in the accelerator. So I see now several hands raised. I'm going to turn to Charlotte for guidance again. If you'd like to, I think we're at the stage where if you want to share your reflections on what you've heard so far, from the presentation of the research to the individuals who shared what's happened since their case study. Charlotte, who would you like to speak next?
Okay, so Rada, I think we are going to go back to our gender approach. So I'm going to invite Sarah Ebieme. Sarah, if you can unmute yourself so we get to listen to Lady now.
Hello, Charlotte.
Okay, Sarah.
Good evening.
Evening.
I want to really express my appreciation towards the contributions made by several people.
Please, can you start by telling us who you are and where you're connecting from?
I am Sarah Ebieme from Akwa Ibom State. in Nigeria. Have you heard me, ma?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sarah from Nigeria. I have been working as a state technical facilitator. And as far as this COVID-19 is concerned, the approach that they had to begin with the health workers was a very good one, because it's like we were like a sort of guinea pig, and people were looking forward to seeing the reactions we will exhibit. And I am saying that since the program started with us, people were really encouraged. But we still have some challenges on the way. Initially, since the program was not the program was not enlarged, the mobilization was not so enlarged. It was limited to frontline workers, health workers, and it was the fixed post was initially in our the LGL that I was serving. It was 5 fixed posts, whereas 10 wards were trained. And that was the first one. So we had limitation of reaching out to the masses. And sometimes we had to move to the places like local government council, the paramount rural palaces, the motor parks, the open places. Yeah, we would stay there, mobilize people, and give the immunization. But that was still not enough. During the second phase, it was extended, but with a reduced number of teams. In the LGA that I was working on LGA, it was only one team to cover the 10 wards, not to talk of revisiting those areas that we immunized. So it was really difficult. So the limitation in the manpower really hindered the program. Apart from that, people were like skeptical receiving it. And I want to say, from the record, from the results we had, in spite, I observed that in spite of all our efforts to do that, to carry out COVID-19 immunization, it was only 0.9%, call it 1%. So I'm like, what we really need to do more? But thank God for the mass COVID-19 immunization campaign that they want to do. And meanwhile, they're doing rollout of vaccine. But as it is only limited to the health workers. They are not using us as a external budget again. So I don't know what will happen. And I'm just hoping that it will be productive. So that is my own contribution for now.
Thank you, Sarah Ebieme, for this. Now, I see the discussion. What I'm hearing is almost a kind of consciousness about the significance of professionals who work in health, who are involved in COVID-19 vaccination, to be role models, to lead by example. It is difficult to be credible, of course, if you yourself are not vaccinated. We actually had the testimonial in the Impact Accelerator from a young health professional working for the Red Cross who spent 3 months campaigning for others to vaccinate against COVID, while she herself was personally too scared to actually do it herself. And so there is a thought process, and it's not an easy question. I don't think we can dismiss this. And that is why we made it key to the networking session here, to really discuss networking. The way it works is you click on the button, you go to, you click on networking in Hopin, you click on join, and you're going to be connected. I'm not going to do it now, but you're going to be connected to another health professional, and you can discuss, continue this discussion. I think this has been fascinating. I want to thank all of you who joined us. Really, this is about insights, sharing reflections, what we learn as we learn it in a very dynamic way. The pandemic is so new that there is no, everything is still changing very quickly. What you know in the field is likely to be more than what people in Geneva, Seattle, Washington, D.C. know. And that is what we're trying to learn from and appreciate and recognize and honor. The purpose of this session was really to invite you as guests of honor to join once again, to hear that the work that you produced was significant enough that a research team, a qualitative research team, spent 6 months investigating what you told us, making sense of it. We presented some of the initial results today. We'll be sharing much more very soon. But most important, I want to offer a round of applause to those of you who joined the exercise, and actually to every health professional who had at least one time helped an individual or a group overcome their initial reluctance, hesitancy, or fear about vaccination. So I'm now going to ask everyone to unmute so that in addition to the applause, we can also hear some real noise and take the photos. So please go ahead. We're going to take the picture. There's still 164 people in the room. So many screens, I have to go from one to the next. And now at 6 o'clock, so in 38 minutes, you'll be reconvening in the plenary. You're welcome to stay here because we will be holding the commencement ceremony for the first FI 2030 Impact Accelerator. Take care.
Bye bye. Bye. Bye.